Okay, so to wrap things up for this week, I want to talk a little bit about structuring your folders. So all semester, you've pretty much been doing things in just one script. And we talked a little bit about modules, but basically, as your projects get bigger, you're going to find that you're going to want to start reusing more and more of your code. In other words, you might find that you have a general need for utilities like the conversions we did at the start of the class, converting from decimal degrees to DMS, converting units, things like those. And I have a utilities file that I use across all my projects that's just a pile of Python conversions. Same thing with file handlers, setting things up in specific types of CSV files or reading data from like a KML or some other XML format. You'll probably want to create functions that read and write from those files that you use a lot, if there isn't a library already available for them, or if it's a special format within a file, like a specific format of CSV or a specific format of XML. So there you might want to have a module with file handlers in it. Same thing for web services, pulling data in off of the web, and things like modeling, which we'll talk about a little bit next week. So what I do is, as I mentioned before, as I start getting longer and longer files, and I start seeing that I'm replicating the same code over and over again, I'm using the same code, I'll move it into a function. And then, as I start getting functions that I need to call from different scripts, I'll move them into a module or a separate file. And then, when I need to reuse them across multiple projects, I go to this type of a structure. And because of the amount of code that I write, I use this type of structure all the time. In other words, what I have is a folder called Projects Python for all my Python projects. I have a folder called Projects, and in there are all of my different projects that I might be working on, either for clients or my own stuff. And then I have another folder for reusable. In other words, folder for usable code. And then in there are folders, and inside those folders would be modules or files of Python code, either just functions or classes that I've created. And some of them I've collected from other folks. And I can reuse these across different projects. And the way I do that is what we just did with Spatial Pi, is you just import sys and then append a path to your reusable library folder, so in this case utilities, and put that inside of each Python script in your projects, and then those scripts can access all of the files. You can now import any of the files that you need from these reusable folders. And then you start managing this reusable code, and over time this will become the most valuable code that you have, because down the road someone asks you to start a project, and if it's similar to a previous project you've done, you can just use the reusable code, and all of a sudden you get that project done maybe twice, 3 times as fast as you could the first time that you wrote that type of code. And over time you'll be able to do more, and you'll be able to get stuff done more quickly, and also because these will be tested on previous projects, they'll actually be more reliable. So I highly recommend doing that. And then the other big one, as your programs get bigger, is documentation. And what I'm going to ask you to do this week is add a README to each of your files. And basically what I want you to do is, as you document your scripts, think about the purpose of the script. Why are you writing it? Or the purpose of your program. What are the intellectual property rights? In other words, to use your code from HSU, you actually own the code that you write here on campus, because you pay HSU to come here, take a class. Well, the things you produce are yours. You own the intellectual property rights for those. If you were an employee of HSU, like I am, a lot of the code that I write becomes the property of HSU or a client who's paid us to develop that code. So different property rights for different situations. Also, there's open source. You can actually put a license on your code to say this is publicly available and let anyone use it. Installation instructions are huge. As I'm sure you've seen with programs that you've downloaded and installed, if you can't get through the install, then you can't use it. And so this is really critical. And one of the big things about installation instructions is if you wrote the script, you know how to install it and run it. The challenge here is how to think of it in terms of someone who's never seen it, and what are all the steps you had to go through to get it to work. So a lot of times what I'll do is I will take my software and I'll move it to a computer, or have someone else install it on their computer, and sit and watch them and see what they have to do, what are every single step they have to execute, because there's almost always steps that I forget about. and then I write them up as they're doing it and roll that into my documentation. Getting started instructions, similarly, what is it people know to get started? And again, the more programming you do, the more you write your own code, the more you're going to forget those steps. And anything else you might need. Hard to know what that is, but once you put your software out there, again, I highly recommend giving it to a few people, having them try it, and they will tell you what they needed, and then update the documentation and give it to them again and see if it then works. And who to contact if there is a problem, especially in the research community. You know, we will just put our name, our affiliation, our email into our software, and people contact us to ask us questions. And that happens to me on a regular basis. And also, of course, the blogs are out there. And a lot of times you'll end up talking to the people who wrote the library, especially in the open source community. So for right now, what I'm asking you to do is just a readme.txt file. And you'll want to do this for the rest of your assignments, because your assignments are going to become more and more unique to you and your project. So I'm not going to know what they're doing. And I've already had some trouble getting some of your assignments to work because you did something a little different that I wasn't expecting, and I struggled a little bit with it. I may have emailed you and then got it working. But the README file, it's just called readme.txt. You can create these and edit them in Notepad++. That's what I do. It's the easiest. Or any basic word processor. Don't use Microsoft Word, because remember, Python is portable to other environments, and Word isn't always, but plain ASCII text files are always portable in any environment. And just put the information that's up here into the readme.txt. Now, if you want to do some web development, it's becoming fairly common to use HTML, either readme.html that you ship with your library that you've created or your program you've created, or an install.html, something that triggers the person, oh, this is where you need to go to open these to learn what you need to do to get the software running. Now, as your projects get bigger, and especially if you produce stuff commercially, you'll probably create a website. Really common to have a website for your programs that describe how it works. And that's great, because then when you update it, do a new version, you just update the website and it's immediately available to everybody. Okay, have fun.